When I signed up for this, there was no such thing as COVID on the radar, and now I know probably way too much about COVID. But I think that being well informed is going to be what helps us get through this and also give opportunity to student athletes. So let's get going. Next up, I kind of got Mike, who's going to take care of kind of the protocols and the processes for submitting questions, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, George. So thanks everybody for calling in today. It's our first time ever running a webinar like this. Between both this session and the Monday one, we've got over 800 people who have signed up. So there's obviously an appetite for the information we're putting out there. I did want to quickly touch on a couple quick housekeeping items. To clarify, this is, you'll notice it's a little bit different than some of the other Zoom meetings you may have been on. This is a Zoom webinar. So by default, all of our the participants involved you cannot turn your camera on, you cannot turn your microphone on. The only way to communicate with the panelists is via the Q&A function. In the ribbon at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on the device you're on, you'll see there is a button that says Q&A. There will be, we're anticipating most of this town hall will be spent answering your questions. So please, if you have any questions throughout, submit them that way. And then once we get through the formal slide deck, we will be putting those questions up on the screen. We'll try to get to as many as we can, and we'll invite the panelists to respond to them. We can't guarantee we'll respond to all of them, but any that we do not get to, we'll be putting a document together following the second webinar on Monday that we'll distribute out to our membership. So yeah, with that being said, I will pass it over. I think it's George or John who will take over from here. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and if you need any clarity on where to put the questions and stuff like that, let me know. I promise to keep these 4 people on a pretty good pace through the slides so we can get to the questions, especially John and Rick. I know that Marvin and Stephen won't have a hard time getting through their stuff quick. They've probably done it 30 times now. So the main speakers today, additional to myself, is John Payton, the ASA Executive Director. We got Marvin Davish, as you can read, is SPARS, and Stephen Patrick from SPARS also. They're, you know, basically who oversee the government level of what the ASA does. And then we got past president Rick Gilson will be speaking. He's down in Southern Alberta right now. And he spends most of his day on things like this. So he's kind of our local pro who'll help us get through all these things. Next, I want to sort of go a quick overview of the session and kind of what the topics will be. We're going to quickly just go through a timeline from that March 12th on. Then we're going to sort of have a quick discussion on ASA membership fees. I know that's a bit of a hot topic right now. We'll also make sure that we're going to continue to do that ASA coaches education requirement and how that looks during COVID, because, you know, having those coaches certified to be the best they can be, whether it's in a practice or in a competition scenario, is important. Competition, which is a big one for a lot of people, cohorts and mini leagues, and then presentation from SPARS themselves. And they have a lot of information there that kind of answers those top 5 questions also. And then open to Q&A. We will be ending at 4:25 sharp on all Q&A, and then we'll be moving forward to answering those questions via, you know, an F and Q type document afterwards. So first up, I just want to have John to sort of, you know, lead us through our next thing on sort of what our disclaimer is and how it works, because I think some people are struggling with that.
Thanks, George, and welcome everybody. So what's, I think, important to be aware from the outset is the role of the ASAA and as the governing body for high school sports, and the schools that join the association who choose to abide by the membership of the ASAA. So, I mean, obviously, we've been doing a lot of advocacy on behalf of our schools across many planes, and that will continue on your behalf. But what the executive committee and us as a staff have discussed is the hierarchy. And so the ASAA can make its policies, but ultimately, you know, the top level decision making occurs at the Government of Alberta AHS level and our ministry. Then it comes down superintendents and then down to principals. So we could have a policy that says you can do this and you can do that. But if your school superintendent says, well, you can do this, but you can't do that, then that's their call. And then the principals do the same thing. There might be challenges within a school building. That as well as their call to make local decisions in their school as they would in any other circumstance. So so that's the disclaimer. You know, just because the ASAA says something doesn't mean that that's the way it has to happen absolutely everywhere. Your policies can be more restrictive, they just can't be less restrictive. I won't go through this in detail because you all received the slide deck well in advance, but I just wanted to very briefly say that the day before the global pandemic was declared, our executive was already on trying to make decisions around wrestling provincials, and which they did, and then basketball provincials later on the next day. And then from there, lots more decisions had to be made. And they are outlined there. This is really just a skeleton of some of the key things and some of the key decisions that have been made by the executive committee and the documents we've put out over the last 6 months. And when I say skeleton, I mean that it's been a very, very consuming, all-consuming of staff and executive in particular, wonderful volunteers. So I thank all of them. On to the next slide. So where are we? So, and this is part of the reason we're having this call for you today, is to provide some clarity. So we have the September 9th release from the association regarding cohorts and mini leagues. There was a change to government documents for sport, recreation and physical activity that came out on September 3. So our executive met around that time. We modified the position of the association, and from there came up with that memo that went on September 9. And the primary focus of that was around the cohorts and the mini leagues. We also addressed membership fees, but it clarified some questions for you, and hopefully people have taken the time to read that. If you don't know where it is, please go to the website. You cannot miss it. It's right on the main page, asaa.ca. So I think what's important to mention, and this one I did want to read, is that the ASAA isn't preventing students from participating in multiple sport cohorts at one time, but they're not recommending it either. It is permitted by the government of Alberta that this be allowed to occur, but ultimately it comes down to parental discretion and those parents weighing the risk of any involvement in school sports in the current COVID-19 climate. So, and as well, it just gives an update on where we're at with fees, as I mentioned. So if we can go to the next page, Mike. Thank you. So just as clarity on the membership fees, there isn't a discount on fees at the moment. There have been questions that came in prior to this webinar. The vast majority of questions that we got were around cohorts and mini leagues. There were some questions, but not a lot about the membership fees. But our executive felt really important for the association to be able to fully serve its member schools, and they need to do that with a full complement of staff, which at the moment, people might not be aware, 2 of the staff of the ASAA are actually paid for through various grants and support from other groups. So we're effectively a staff of 3.4 full-time equivalents, not 6 as some might think, working on the ASAA, and that's where your membership fees go. So, but if there is a surplus at the end of the year, the executive has said that surplus will either be credited towards your next year's fees, or returned to schools. And just as a bit of clarity, membership fees of the ASAA doesn't mean provincials fees. It doesn't mean I'm paying to go to provincials, because there are so many things outside of provincials that the association does and has continued to do and will continue to do that are listed down there. I'm not going to read them to you, but that's only a partial list of the many, many things that the association does on your behalf. Moving on to coach education requirements. So as those who are currently coaching or have previously coached in schools would be aware, we have had some changes in the past year, and we are moving away soon from schoolcoach.ca to a formal partnership with the Coaching Association of Canada, which we've been hoping for 10 years. So current requirements: 1 person in each school must complete the new course, Coaching School Sport Redefining Winning. 1 coach on every team must complete the ASAA Bylaws and Policies course, and every coach must have the Making Headway Concussions in Sport for Safety purposes. The flexibility being afforded around redefining winning is something that the executive is sort of remaining open on at the moment, because the course is not quite finished and ready to go up on the Coaching Association Canada website. But as soon as it is ready to go, it'll be put up. Deadlines for those things, normally October 10, currently extended to December 30, possibly could be extended later, in recognition of the fact that, it's not an easy time right now, and there needs to be a degree of flexibility. But we certainly, strongly recommend, if you've got coaches that are out there working with kids, they really should know the bylaws. They really should be taking the concussion course in the best interests of the student athletes. Most of our coaches currently have the previous course. A bunch of them, especially if you are NCCP trained, would have Making Headway. But Making Headway is now the course through CAC. It's free. And I would recommend that those that haven't taken it go on and take it as soon as possible.
Okay, thanks, John. I totally agree that those courses just strengthen the ability for them to work with our adolescents at this time. Next, we're going to move on to Rick, and he's going to kind of go through some of the addressing the competition guidelines. Thanks, John.
We're trying to get through these as quickly as we can. I appreciate that, George and John. So we do have a situation now where we are able to engage in local competition within the guidelines that are provided. We have acknowledged and want to emphasize that this does not circumvent or go beyond any guidelines brought down by your superintendents or your principals. They have the final say in that within the regulations that have been laid out by ASAA and the organizations above us. So schools should look to every opportunity that they can within that to find ways for their student athletes to participate at some level in sports. Some zones are considering zone championships or zone competitions within sport. Others are going to have very limited availability over these next several weeks as their jurisdictions work through the challenges that they have. And that's very definitely a local situation, even school by school within divisions and zones. We need to respect that. What we want to emphasize is that as an executive, we're still taking every opportunity to explore ways to provide an opportunity for all of our student athletes to participate in their sport, hopefully in a provincial championship sometime this school year. We are planning, we have looked at our calendar, we are looking at exam schedules this year more so than any, with quarters and quarter exams, vacation periods, and the rest of it to see how we might allocate equitably an opportunity for all sports to participate through the year as quickly as we're able to do so. To that end, we'll be reaching out to zones for representation on a committee with executive members that will review some of the timelines we've explored, look at the hurdles that we would have to overcome and the partnerships and conversations we would have to have with some of the sports associations outside of schools. So at the end of it, we are committed to trying to do the best we can by all schools, all sports, all students. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Rick. The last slide that we have is John, and he's just going to go through the cohorts and mini leagues. I know that there'll be more questions and also a lot more clarity brought to us through our SPARS counterparts here too. So John, you're up.
Thanks, George. So I won't go into great detail because Stephen and Marvin will do that, but just based on a bunch of questions I've been getting, just a few things that I will mention, and one is around like the cohorts of 50. So if the coaches, officials, trainers, and so on can physically distance from the student athletes, then you can have up to 50 student athletes in the cohort of 50. If the coaches can't physically distance or others, then they have to be included in that cohort of 50. There are some questions around club sport. The executive met yesterday to discuss the current participation on a non-school team policy. And we've indicated there that it still applies, but the executive is discussing some flexibility around that, and we're just working on some communication and how that might look. But in order to do anything that sort of goes slightly outside of policy, the executive needs to obtain approval from the zones. So perhaps by early next week, once we have the second of the 2 town halls, we'll have an opportunity to share that information with you on where there may be flexibility on a limited time basis only around 1 or 2 of our policies. So, and I'll let Stephen and Marvin address the 14-day waiting period around switching cohorts and so on, but I think I'm good, George.
Perfect. Thank you. So next up, we got the stars of the show. No pressure, guys. We got Marvin and Stephen up for us, and they got their little presentation. And I'll get out of your way, guys. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to kick it off. So thanks to George, the rest of the ASAA executive, John, and all the staff for extending an invitation to Stephen and myself to be here with you guys this afternoon to share some information on the SPAR guidance and then to answer some of your questions. As well, a big thanks to everyone that's joined us from all the schools across the province. It's great to see a lot of familiar names on the participants list, and hopefully we can try to guide you through some of this stuff and answer some of your questions. I just wanted to also kick off and say that we admire everything that each and every one of you are doing in your respective schools to try to make it as safe as possible at this time for your students, your families, and your colleagues. And hopefully athletics can continually be reintroduced back into your schools sooner than later if it has not already done so. When the initial shock of the COVID-19 lockdown passed, the attention of our sector turned to contemplating what sport and physical activity would look like in the era of public health restrictions. The development and implementation of return to sport plans, driven by a commitment to sport organizations' members and the practicality of long-term sustainability, is a task perhaps without parallel that we've ever had to deal with. It's been a challenging time for all of us to navigate through this. We are all continue to have to remain optimistic and positive that sport, physical activity, and recreation can continue to return safely throughout Alberta, as long as we are all working together and following the necessary guidelines and safety measures. Over the summer, we've seen many sports already get back up and running. We've seen the sports of soccer, baseball, softball, and golf, to name a few, get back up and running in some sort of formation and semblance. And now as we transition to the fall, we're starting to see others back up and running, including football, curling, hockey, and basketball, to name a few. Our team at SPAR has been working with many of the provincial sport organizations to assist them with their return to play guidelines and protocols. We've been delivering education sessions like we are today, and we'll continue to do that as long as we all hopefully return to what our new normal is. When the government of Alberta announced the return to play guidelines back on June the 12th, they released the first SPAR guidance document. The SPAR guidance document, as well as all other guidance and support documents, are located on the Alberta Biz Connect portal. On the slide that we have listed, those that we will refer to today in our presentation. So Mike, if you want to just flip to the next slide, please now. Thanks. Since June 12th, there have been 3 other updated SPAR guidance documents that have been released, each time with a few more modifications and updates that have allowed the window to open a little more with what sports can do. It certainly is contingent upon your organizations and member schools to follow the guidance provided by Alberta Health in the activities of your organization, your member clubs, and individual members. This guidance, as all of you are fully aware, can and does change quickly as we progress through the various stages of the relaunch, and it is incumbent upon organizations and schools to ensure that you're fully aware of all the requirements in place at any one given time. Over the last kind of 60 days, back on July the 10th, we presented to some of you that are on the call today in regards to the initial release SPAR guidance. Since that time, we've remained in ongoing contact with John, the executive, and some other staff members as we try to assist the ASAA in how they navigate through their decision-making processes along the way. Most recently, on September the 4th, Alberta Health and SPAR co-hosted a town hall on the updates from the September 3rd release of the guidance documents. At this point in time, we're still waiting for Alberta Health to review all of those questions and comments and issues and compile those responses. We continue to be patient with Alberta Health during this time, knowing that their resources and capacities are limited and maxed out as they're dealing with everyone in the province on all aspects of relaunching business, including our sport of sport. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Stephen. He's going to provide you with an update on that SPAR guidance from September the 3rd. Then we're going to run through some of the pre-submitted questions and themes that were sent in advance. Thanks to Mike and Deanna for compiling that information to us. So over to you, Stephen, and next slide, Mike. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks very much, Marvin, and a thank you to George and John for having us today. Try and get through this fairly quickly. I know the questions and answers will be highly anticipated. So cohorts obviously are a big piece of the guidance for stage 2, and I know you guys are very familiar with them. We're just going to go through some of the new language here. So again, as John mentioned, the maximum number of individuals that can form a cohort remains at 50. These should be formed for any sports, physical activities, or recreation that participants are unable to physically distance, okay? So the language in the guidance, the 50-person maximum includes any coaches, staff, instructors, participants, officials, and volunteers who consistently and routinely engage with participants at a distance of less than 2 meters. coaches, staff, and officials who primarily interact with individuals or teams at a distance of 2 meters or greater do not need to be counted as part of the cohort. And these individuals are asked to wear a mask and perform proper hand hygiene if it becomes necessary to temporarily interact with cohorting participants. All right, next slide, please, Michael. All right, so I know the gray area here, the expectation is that individuals minimize or limit the number of cohorts that they participate in. And if individuals wish to change cohorts, they should not participate in a new cohort activity for 14 days. Basically, Alberta Health has indicated that they're not restricting it any longer to one cohort. It makes things really, really tough on organizers of sport to kind of navigate that. And I know the ASAA executive have had many discussions on this, and I saw some questions already in the chat box. So mini leagues, how is this going to work? Basically, up to 50 individuals, you can form as many teams as you want. So whether that's 4 volleyball teams or 2 soccer teams. Each sport is different. Curling has some different models with physically distancing, golf obviously physical distance, etc. So gameplay should be limited to those teams in the same mini league and should not be playing outside of their cohort. If that mini league comes to completion during stage 2, then you could form a new cohort provided there's a 14-day period. Now, the question has been asked about 14-day breaks when you've got 2 cohorts. And what I would suggest is that what we don't want to do with this is we don't want to increase the contact. So if people are in one cohort, we want to be encouraging them to take that 14 days off between the kind of the new cohort and the old cohort. If they're in 2 cohorts, if we don't take 14 days off and there's a break, then we've now introduced people to a 3rd cohort. So every time we don't take that 14-day break, we're adding new contacts outside of that 14-day period that we want to avoid. Tournaments we'll speak to in a few slides. They are not part of the mini league concept unless you are just utilizing those same teams in that tournament format. Next slide, Michael. All right, so some new guidance here with regards to travel is that there are now no longer any restrictions within the province for traveling for sport and physical activity if there's 2-meter physical distancing or if you're using the mini league or cohort model. And let me just back up a little bit. I should have started with this. Mini league, cohort, it's the same term, just interchangeable words. With regards to interprovincial travel, not as much affecting you guys, but certainly there with Dawson Creek, for example, on the football leagues, that is allowed. However, you need to make sure that that the teams that are traveling from other provinces are following their own provincial guidance as well, and that they can't pick and choose between the guidance. So if they are part of an Alberta League cohort, they can't also be in additional cohorts within their own province. With regards to spectators, indoors, it's maxed at 100 for capacity with 2 meters of physical distancing. And if you're outdoors in a seated environment, think track and field, you could be up to 200 seated spectators. It is strongly recommended that all spectators wear masks, especially in indoor settings. Next slide. All right, so just a little bit here with regards to tournaments, races, competitive events. Again, they are permitted if you can observe physical distancing, or if you're following the mini league or cohort model. If those are not options, then the tournament or event is not permitted. And what we want to avoid at this time is any tournament or events that would compel a new cohort team to be formed for a short period, whether that's just a weekend or a week, what have you. So again, understanding that that the cohorts that we're forming are more of a long-term thing. We don't want new cohorts being formed every weekend or every second weekend. All right. I'm just going to touch a little bit more here, and I probably should have done this off the top. So the cohort model is basically Alberta Health's compromise between risk elimination and everybody staying inside, and and opening it up to interactions between all Albertans. So it's more about risk mitigation, obviously, and keeping those numbers as low as possible. The cohort numbers of 50 serve two purposes. One, obviously, it limits the number of interactions we have, and two, it also makes it a manageable task for Alberta Health should they need to participant track or conduct contact tracing. Some rapid response scenarios here. So if one of your athletes or a coach perhaps gets sick while participating, really you want them to be leaving the facility. You want them to be isolating, getting them away from every other participant. We should be masking them up. We shouldn't be putting them on buses or taxis. And obviously we should be cleaning all surfaces. I won't go into too much detail. I would imagine your last bullet there, your school or division will already have procedures in place that will likely be more comprehensive than anything I can go over in the short time I have. So these were some questions that were submitted in advance. Clarification between when a coach or an official counts towards the cohort level of 50 people. And so the two bullets there are the ones that I read out earlier. So if you're consistently engaging with participants at a distance of less than 2 meters, you would be inside the cohort. If you are able to stay outside of that 2 meters for the most part and temporarily interact, you could wear a mask and perform proper hand hygiene. I do want to say this about cohorts. Even if cohorting, we do want to practice physical distancing when possible, and we want to be wearing masks when possible. So, you know, if you're in a gymnasium and you're with a group of cohorted students, you know, if there's no need to bring them all together into a huddle to provide instruction, you can provide instruction when they're in a spaced out environment. That's obviously better. Other overriding philosophies with regards to COVID is outdoors better than indoor. So any opportunity you have to take your training sessions, those types of things outside, that would be definitely more ideal than indoors. Can student athletes participate in more than one sport cohort? If yes, can one be with a school sport and another with a community club sport at the same time? So again, since August 28th and the September 3rd guidance documents, this has been a little bit murky, a little bit muddy. I'm going to read to you right now a quote from Dr. Hinshaw on August the 27th from her press conference. So we have not officially restricted the number of cohorts that children can belong to. Having said that, it would be my recommendation for parents, especially as school is going back in person, to keep the number of cohorts that their children are a part of to as small a number as possible. Obviously, we all have a responsibility, and I think Dr. Hinshaw's message from day one has been that the actions we take now are going to show up in the COVID infections and numbers 2 to 3 weeks down the road. And we all have a responsibility to do our part. That being said, as indicated by that quote, we are not restricting, the government of Alberta is not restricting the number of cohorts. We would suggest that, you know, the more people that you interact with, the more potential there is for transmission, obviously. I mean, we've all lived COVID for the last 6 months here, and I think we all understand. But that being said, parents are going to make their own decisions, and the administrators on this call, whether it's within the school, within ASAA, here within government, we're not going to be able to enforce or police anything that's a must. An example of how a mini league could work. So again, you'd have up to 50 individuals that could play games. They could be training. I know one thing that's been brought up before with that John Payton has brought up. You know, could volleyball teams, say if there's 4 that would fit within that 50, could there be some round robin play? And then that cohort breaks up for 2 weeks. The schools actually stay together as cohorts, and so they train with their volleyball team. And then after that 2 weeks is up, you could, in essence, have another sort of round robin with another 3 cohorts. So that's one scenario that we've definitely seen. And I guess the question there about, you know, well, part of the cohort staying together, you know, if you're splitting it up and waiting that 14-day break, then you're in essence creating a new cohort. And you're not hurting anything by keeping your volleyball team together because they were cohorted in the first place. Urban versus rural and who can compete. Very early on within the guidance, when there were restrictions on travel, we definitely wanted teams to stay as close to home as possible. That had different implications for rural situations than it did for urban. Very easy for 4 high schools within the city of Edmonton or Calgary or other urban centers to participate against each other. When we're looking at rural schools, definitely there's understanding that there's going to be travel, and certainly with the travel restrictions being lifted, that definitely makes it a lot easier in this case. Let's move on to the next slide. I think I've touched on this already, the 14-day sit-out period. I want to clarify that it is not a quarantine, it's not isolation. Basically, it's just a break between cohorts. It obviously reflects the incubation period of the virus. And, as we've discussed, you could certainly stop your league, take 14 days off, and then start over. Apologize for repeating these as they come up on the slides. Just here, it is recommended that many leagues appoint a responsible person whose role is to ensure cohort rules. This is being done obviously at the school level. It's being done at the ASAA level. It's being done within community sport as well, but certainly an important piece of the guidance. The million-dollar question about expansion on restrictions, obviously 50 people for some sports is not ideal. At this time, what we've heard from Alberta Health is that there are no changes in the foreseeable future. I think that we all want to get through, the first few months of school. You guys are more aware than we are as to the pressures that you're under and the situations that you're in within the school setting. And so I really don't think, and we've heard from Alberta Health Services representatives that there's going to be any changes in the near future with regards to this size. I think we've got one more slide, Michael.
Mike, next slide.
Yeah. I'm going to turn this back to Marvin.
Thanks, Stephen. So the question was, how can you safely run a school program under the current guidelines? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some principles and some best practices that other sport organizations have tried to adopt here over the last 2 to 3 months. So obviously safety is the #1 priority, and it should come as no surprise. Compliance with public health guidelines is non-negotiable. Based on public health guidance, organizations have been developing a range of protocols, practices, and supports within their associations. They've worked with their respective PSOs, national sport organizations, schools, school boards, and other provincial health authorities. So that's ultimately, what you have to be doing as you're looking to develop your return to sport program within your school. Secondly, let's try to commit to a quality experience. Obviously, we've been shut down since March 11th. And we want to, as we look to come back to sport, we want to show a commitment to values-based sport in relation to the values of the ASAA, your school, and then I think your own personal values. Over the past number of months, we've seen everything from virtual programs to live streaming, the formations of hubs and bubbles, to the development of custom applications to support diverse program delivery. Your early programming could focus on physical distancing that supports stronger skill development opportunities and relationships amongst teammates, coaches, rather than just jumping straight into competition. Ultimately, we want to use the resources and tools of cohorting and mini leagues to lead to meaningful competitions when schools, teams, coaches, athletes are ready to return. I think the next one, stakeholder engagement and communication. Certainly for all of us as leaders, communicating with everyone is paramount to ensure that we can successfully run, school athletic programs. We have to ensure that all parties are properly informed and aware of the respective return to sport plans. Everyone's going to have to certainly be flexible and adaptable regardless of what the situation is and how you're going to develop those, moving forward. Supporting the broader community. I think, through all of this, sport leaders have connected with external organizations and networks to share and learn from promising practices and evidence-based approaches. Given the challenges everyone is facing, it's certainly been refreshing to see the openness and transparency among sharing between organizations with the intent of supporting everyone's successes. I think, now is the time to throw out some of the competitiveness that sometimes exists between all of us and our respective organizations and schools so that everyone can come back stronger. You know, a lot of us, we don't have the answers. So tap into your networks, ask questions, lean on your colleagues, reach out to somebody who maybe you haven't, thought of in the past. You know, it's certainly going to help you in the long run, as new relationships will be built and continue to pay dividends long after the pandemic has ended. And then finally, I think you want to take an intentional approach. Exercise caution, take it slow. Start small. You don't have to be a hero right off the bat with your school returning to full-blown competition if you're not ready and you don't think your athletes and your coaches are. Use this as an opportunity to disrupt the status quo, recalibrate, and recognize that in some cases your sports and teams are going to run differently than what we've seen before previously as to how school sport has operated for so many years. So ideally, we want to see the creation of safe and equitable school communities that support student athletes and the broader school community as we all look to return to sport within our schools across the province in a safe manner. So I'll flip it back now to George for the next part of the session.
Perfect. Thank you to both of you for number one, taking the time and going through that. And no matter what, there's as we all come to realize, it's a very fluid situation, but there's also a lot of gray in all this. So I don't know if Stephen, myself, Marvin, John, Rick can answer every question to something that is black and white like some people would like, but I know that Mike has taken and tried to create some themes of the questions that have come through, and we'll now try and take the next sort of 18 minutes or so to answer these questions. I'll direct them towards these people. I'm getting clarity. I know that this is being recorded and I believe they'll have access to it after. Is that right, John? Can you give me a thumbs up if that's right? Yeah, so for those people who think it's going a little too fast, we'll have access to this for you later. And we also will have answers to all the questions at the emailed out at some point once we're done and can get through this. So I think that answers Cody's question, who was asking about the recording there. So thanks for that question. So first question up is, can coaches coach a club volleyball team and a school volleyball team at the same time? I'll answer this one real quick and fast. Yes, they can, but they have to make sure that they are properly social distancing at all times and using proper hand hygiene to be able to do both. Now, some school jurisdictions and some principals might say no to this, and they have a right as a school to set their standards, no different than the government of Alberta says this is the base standard, and some superintendents said we're going above and beyond that, and some principals have said we're going above and beyond that. So it can be extended farther, but according to the documents right now, yes, you can coach more than one team if you are socially distanced with a mask, proper hand hygiene. Now, for any clarity around your school, specifically in your jurisdiction, you must approach your principal and athletic director. Did I miss anything, guys?
Yeah, can I jump in on the competition side of it, George? And I may even get Stephen or Marvin to hop in here. But there have been a couple of questions in the that have been sent in around whether, if you're coaching and the kids are involved in competition at the club level, and if they're involved in competition at the school level, is that permitted? So that was the thing I'd mentioned earlier, that the executive had discussed having some flexibility around that on a temporary basis, whether that's before or after Christmas. We're still working through the finer details of that. Something will come out next week on that. But at the moment, because very few schools are actually doing any practicing or have kids out, they can go out and do volleyball club activity and competition for sure. But the question I would have, I guess, for Marvin and Stephen, related to this, is that if there is, if a student gets involved in a club volleyball program, the club volleyball program is having practices and they're having games officiated games against other teams, and then the school decides that they're going to create a team because they're now allowed by the superintendent, and so they decide to have some mini league competition. Effectively, you have some competitions going on. Some of them might be officiated, some might be not, but let's say they're officiated. So do you want to reference at all how you feel the government's position is on playing the same sport in a club and a school team at the same time? Different groups, same sport, same time.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there really isn't any restrictions in place. The one sport cohort limitation that we saw in June was kind of you know, obviously a limitation in one sport. Now that it's that you're allowed to participate in more than one cohort, in essence, it really doesn't matter whether that's the same sport or different sports or what have you.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephen. Mike, next question. Acknowledging that wrestling is a high contact sport, what is the likelihood that there will be a wrestling season? I don't know the guidelines around that right now. Stephen or Marvin, have you had anything around that sport when you worked with them as a provincial organization?
Yeah, I mean, this would be, I think they're asking the ASAA here about the wrestling season. For us, there's, you know, wrestling is like any other sport. They have to follow the rules in terms of the contacts and cohorts and things like that. So I think this is probably a question to ASAA.
Hey, Rick, you wanted, oh, sorry, go ahead, Marvin.
Sorry, George. I was just going to add, I think the writer of the question should contact Wrestling Alberta and just find out what they're doing at this point in time with respect to their return to sport to try to get some more information.
Good idea.
Rick, you had a comment?
AS2A would also be visiting with wrestling to look at what they're doing, just as we do with the other sports. And that is in terms of shifting the start of wrestling and shifting the competition part of wrestling, that is part of the work of the committee that we spoke about earlier in looking to try to get all provincials for all sports somehow in this school year.
Thanks. Hey, Mike, next question. Given that student athletes are now permitted to participate in multiple athletic cohorts simultaneously as of September 3rd, please expand on the 14-day rest period that is still required when switching cohorts. What is the point of having a protocol for switching cohorts when you can play in a multiple cohorts at that time?
I'll just hop in here. I mean, great question. I think my answer prior to August 28th and my answer subsequent to August 28th is completely different. It's still in the guidance. All I can do is, as I mentioned earlier, I think that what we want to do is we want to limit the number of cohorts. So if somebody has decided that they're in one cohort and going to stay in one cohort, then they should probably give 14 days rest between switching to a new cohort. If someone has decided that they're in two cohorts, or their parents, the family, etc., then by not doing this 14-day rest period and entering into an additional cohort, you're in essence entering a third cohort. So, you know, it's a great question. It's not as applicable as it once was. I don't know how to answer it other than what I have given.
Thank you. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think some of it we're resting on people to make the right decision for not just themselves, but for everyone at the same time that are involved in the cohorts they work with. And that pressure is being put back on the participant more than it is based on a guideline or a rule established by GOA at this time. So, and I know this is a real muddy one for us. And, you know, I know that as an office, if you guys are trying to work your way through it, please give us a call. Anyone on staff, myself, Rick, some of the other people involved in the executive would be willing to kind of talk your way through to get to a good place that you as a school and as a coach can get to the place that you're comfortable with what you guys are doing. So next question, Mike. If fall sports championship do not proceed and relocate spring, is there considered being made impact on spring sports? There's going to be impact on everyone. I'll just answer this one really quick. Rick has already alluded to that. You know, we're in the process of formulating a group of people from around the province to look at what we can do to adjust and manipulate that calendar so that we can try to achieve all sports at one time. I know the question is they lost, so why do they get it back? You know, we're not treating it as what happened last year and conjunction this year. We have a group of student athletes that we want to try and service, and I think that everyone in the membership want to try and service them right now at this time. So we're looking at how can we service all of them. Will there be some hard choices and hard decisions being made by some students and by some schools? But not every school offers every sport. So sometimes it's going to be easy decisions for those schools. So they never offered badminton or they never offered cheer. So you know, we're going to let schools take direction and going what they want to, and we're going to try and get a calendar in front of them that allows student athletes to get that experience this year based on COVID's impact on this year. Did I miss anything, John or Rick? Okay, Rick, go ahead.
We do know that the zones have voted that there will be no provincial championships before Christmas. And so that means we are already exploring shifting provincials for volleyball, football, golf, and cross country into a post-Christmas time, not necessarily spring, but post-Christmas time.
Perfect. Next question, please, Mike. Separate related football question. Will cohort's recommendation of 50, how can football be allowed safely? Will limited design for community sports. So the one, yeah, I don't think the government of Alberta is going to be changing this one, right?
I provided a typed answer for this that I think everybody can see the typed answers in terms of how to approach this.
Just say it real quick, Rick.
Well, the simple fact is you can't have 12-man football right now in a safe manner. And so teams are going to need to look at creating split squad cohorts if your squad is larger, as mine always was, and get into a situation where you've got somewhere between low 20s of athletes, counting coaches and officials in that number, and look at competing in 9s or 7s or even 6-man football to provide those opportunities, knowing your 12-man season is hopefully a piece that we succeed in pulling off in the spring.
Yeah, leagues are going to look different. They're not going to be 8 or 12 teams deep. They're going to be small groups for small periods of time, then 2 weeks off, and different. Football is right now, without there being provincials, a lot of it is training based. So you just have to make sure you follow the Alberta Health guidelines when it comes to maintaining that 50 cohort. Does that mean you can play exhibition right now? It doesn't mean you can't, but you have to think differently than how it looked in the past. And you might even have to split your team within the school itself just to have a offensive versus defense situation. And you might want to go to 6 or 9 man. Yes, Marvin?
George, I was just going to quickly say, I think that we could tap into the resources from Football Alberta. They've been running community football now for probably about 6 weeks or so. Certainly a number of those teams and community organizations have made adaptations, so we can learn from their best practices and what's worked and what hasn't so far.
Yeah, John, you had a comment?
Yeah,
too?
I think just looking at the bottom of the second question, we're working within the requirements or the guidelines that are provided by government. So the folks in this call are not really the ones, I think, to answer the question on why the limit of 50. That's a decision at a level of by the medical specialists, I guess. But we did ask for consideration of an increase in that limit, but ultimately that's the government's call.
Yeah, we didn't get up in the morning and just type the number 50 in an email and send it out to you guys. So it came from somewhere else as we filter through the documents. Next question, Mike. Well, that's really big. It seems to make more sense for school sports to run rather than club because the club athletes return to many different schools, whereas school athletes are all part of the same venue. What is the rationale? Well, we're just following what the guidelines are out there. You know, we can put it, you as a school can put in stricter guidelines. I know that in my district, there's conversations right around now saying that there's only one sport cohort in the school. And then the discussion if whether they can be on the other one is our next extension of what we're in right now. You know, like, I don't know if we're the one making the rationale behind it or not. John, Rick, any comments on that? Marvin?
Club sports already been operating.
Challenge. So go ahead,
Marvin, go ahead.
I was just going to say, club sports already been operating. It's kind of a little bit out of the control. You know, certainly it takes shapes and formations in various formats depending on the sport. So, you know what? It's just a situation we're going to have to work through at this point in time.
And I would just add that that follow up from Marvin, schools are later getting started than clubs, so clubs have sort of got the jump on schools. And then the other challenge is that it is so different from one school district to another, where in some parts of the province, schools were allowed to start practicing on September 1. There are others that start next Monday. There are others that start in October, others that are indefinite and might not start till after Christmas. But it's a constant, I think, as Rick and George mentioned earlier, it's a constant rediscussion at the various board levels. So it is such a broad range of what's happening across the province that it's tough to say, to have a sort of one situation fits all.
Yeah, I'd also like to add is, like, in the past, like when it came to club and school, we kind of had the fence posts in the ground, but club is just trying to provide opportunities for kids to be out there and participate, and sport orgs are supporting their clubs and their members to say, yes, let's get kids doing stuff. We're in the same boat. We're just trying to get kids to do stuff. So those timelines and, you know, dates in the calendar that weren't official between us and club that used to be there have kind of been mixed up. But let's remember, club is struggling to get facilities. They're not running rampant right now. You know, they're having a hard time. The one thing we do have for those people that can start practicing and can start participating in sports is we have facilities for these kids to do things. And that's the priority, is take advantage of the facilities, get them in front of really, really strong adult influences, and then help them get through the things they're going through in COVID as young adults themselves. Next question, Mike. If the student athletes are not able to play in a sport this year and they are in grade 12, John, you want to touch on this one? Rick, I know you got some answers for this one.
Sure, I'll start. I'll be quick. So what our Board of Governors in June decided at our annual general meeting was that they affirmed that they support the executive committee staying the course with our current policy related to eligibility. However, which means students have 3 consecutive years of eligibility upon starting grade 10. However, we have an appeals policy, and that appeals policy is not an unreasonable policy, and depending on the circumstances of the student, an appeal may or may not be approved. So just because they've completed 3 years doesn't mean that they might not get the chance to play, but certainly the initial decision, black and white decision, is no, they won't be eligible. And certainly one of the things that does impact whether or not a 4th year of eligibility is considered for a student is whether or not they've actually graduated from high school. So certainly returning students who have graduated and they return, those would be certainly, you know, looked at with much greater scrutiny than those who have not graduated.
Rick, on the trickle-down effect?
Yeah, the piece for me, and I chuckled because I was literally just hitting answer on the typed answers. The piece is very much this: we could grant a 4th year and a 4th year, but every 4th year you grant, you're taking playing opportunities away from the student athletes below. This is a universally felt piece. All student athletes in the spring lost their championships. To say come on back would then create a situation where next year's grade 12s would not have that opportunity to compete, and so on down the line.
Okay, next question, please, Mike. What will the repercussions or punishment for players, teams that violate the cohort mandatory isolation periods? Well, we can't police that. And there are, I guess, Marvin and Stephen, you can touch it. There are fines and all these things out there and stuff like that. But, you know, that's the big thing. We can make some tighter rules, but then we have to be the ones that enforce them. So that was a bit of hesitation by us at the ASAA level when it comes to stuff. Stephen or Marvin?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about mandatory isolation periods, those are, you know, there are legal ramifications with that and fines, etc. I mean, if you're talking about violating cohorts, again, there isn't any sort of teeth behind that that limitation, so there wouldn't be any issue there. If an athlete is in a class and has to isolate and then they come back to sport and put others at risk, yeah, I mean, that's a real concern, obviously. You know, there are possibilities that they could be fined and other action taken against them.
Perfect, thank you. A lot of this comes back to you being a good citizen, right? You know, that's kind of the direction we're sort of shifting towards, like, you know, taking responsibility for COVID collectively. So next question, Mike, and pretty close to the last one, actually, and then we'll have some. Are schools still required to register players if there is no zone competition? John, we talked about this yesterday. Feel free.
Turn your mic on. That's $1.
Thank you, Rick. This is my dollar in the jar. The requirement isn't there, but we did discuss it at executive level. We will have a document that we prepared. We'll be sending it out after the second town hall, which will indicate the expectations around registrations, relaxation of those. But certainly, we encourage schools to register players, because if perchance the season is reinstated in one form or another after Christmas, even if it's a limited time season, then it just saves you the work of having to enter the names there when you might be busy into training and practice and that sort of stuff. So that's entirely up to the school. There'll be no policing, no penalties, anything like that. But we certainly strongly encourage you both to register and to have your coaches taking the concussion course and the bylaws and policies course.
Perfect. Just some clarity. I know that there's some questions going through. We're done, Mike. I know there's been talk about the two teams in one season, stuff like that. That is just sort of starting to hit our plate at the executive level as people are starting to play. Don't start freaking out. There'll be information coming out on that. I know that we've referenced it a bit and people are like, hey, we're breaking rules here. We're breaking rules here. And a little bit of the chat. We'll get to making sure there's clarity on that. First of all, I'd like to thank Stephen and Marvin for their time. I'm glad I don't sit in your chairs right now trying to answer questions that there's no answers to on a daily basis. It's hard enough in my chair. I couldn't imagine your chair, so I really respect you showing the composure and the understanding as we work through this, and I really appreciate your professionalism as we do this too. And I know you guys respect what everyone in this call is trying to accomplish for kids. John, thank you for your continued leadership as we go through this. Countless hours are being put into this on a daily basis to try and support our memberships. There's no championship, there's an abundance of work that is going on. Rick, you know, I know that he's a key contact in all of this, so we want to thank him for what he's been doing. Just some follow-up. The session today was recorded and will be posted on AS2A YouTube page and website for future access. Staff are working to prepare an FAQ document. Yana's busily in the background posting it to the right places to make sure that we have every question and that we answer every question, and that'll be coming out to you collectively as you signed up for it. Summary of the registration deadlines and coaching education deadlines will be provided as well out to the zone so that we can get some clarity on that. The last thing is just a reminder that there is a committee being formed at this time right now around provincials and how we can sort of look at how we accomplish that in that second half of the year. Last thing, I just respect everyone for being here. We know why you're here. You want to get as much clarity as you can so you can do a really good job with kids. Doing that work with kids is very important at this time. It's really important every year, but even now, even more. I got 2 kids myself chomping at the bit, wanting to get out there and do stuff. And they want to be around really positive, skilled people. And that's what you guys are as a group. And I want you to, you know, make sure that you're safe and sound, but, you know, don't get bogged down, look for solutions, rely on the ASAA to help you filter through some of the documents, work collectively within your zones, find solutions to things, not ways around the rules, find solutions to accomplishing something for student athletes. So thank you very much to everyone, and I appreciate the office in the backside of this. Jan, Mike, Heidi, keeping us together as we go through this. There's another one on the 21st, right, John? Yeah, and for those that want to tune back in, they can at that time if we didn't get your question answered in enough clarity. But this is recorded and it'll all be sent out to you and questions will be answered. Are we good, Rick?
We're as good as we can get. Just if we could share with all the participants here, we were in a very similar format. They're just wind tunnels of trying to go and get stuff out there to folks.
Yeah, just not enough time, right? We apologize. So, okay, take care, everyone. Thanks again, Marvin, Stephen.
Thanks, George.
Thanks, George. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.